Something just shifted in North American trade that nobody saw coming. And it's not what you think. The United States just threatened to dismantle Canada's auto industry. Steel tariffs hit 25%. Aluminum duties climbed to 35%. Trump's Commerce Secretary told Canadian officials they'd be second-tier partners in their own trade deal. But here's what Washington didn't expect. Canada didn't blink. Instead, they're building something that could change the balance of power for the next 50 years. What you're about to see goes beyond headlines. This is about leverage, energy, and a quiet strategy that might just outplay the loudest trade war in modern history. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why Trump tariffs could backfire harder than anyone predicted. It started at a trade conference in Toronto. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick appeared virtually from Washington and dropped what Canadian officials called a bombshell: no free trade deal without tariffs. Canada must accept being second on autos. Cars will be assembled in America, not Ontario. Period. The Trump administration wasn't negotiating. They were dictating terms. And across Ontario's factory towns, auto workers saw their jobs hanging in the balance. Windsor, Oshawa, Cambridge. These cities built the North American auto industry alongside Detroit. Now Trump tariffs were threatening to gut them entirely. Prime Minister Mark Carney had met President Donald Trump at the White House just 24 hours earlier. That meeting was described as friendly, but the optimism evaporated instantly when Lutnick's statement went public. Trump's second-term trade strategy became crystal clear: expand tariffs across multiple sectors, force Canada into submission, rebuild American manufacturing dominance. But here's where it gets interesting. Trump's tariffs aren't just hitting Canada. They're hitting America, too. Every vehicle assembled in Ontario contains parts that cross the U.S. border at least 6 times before completion. When Trump tariffs multiply costs at each crossing, American automakers pay the price. Higher steel prices drive up the cost of American cars. Plants in Michigan and Ohio face shortages of Canadian materials. The same tariffs designed to protect U.S. jobs are putting them at risk. Ontario Premier Doug Ford fired back hard. He warned that if Washington destroys Canada's auto and steel sectors, Ontario could cut the flow of critical minerals and cheap hydroelectric energy to the United States. He called it an option he wouldn't want to use, but one that stays on the table. And that's when the real story emerged. Canada holds leverage that Trump's tariffs can't touch. First, energy. Ontario and Quebec supply massive electricity to neighboring U.S. states. Canada remains the largest foreign source of U.S. oil and natural gas. American factories run on Canadian energy, often at lower cost than domestic alternatives. If Ottawa tightens that flow, several U.S. states feel it immediately. Second, critical minerals. The U.S. defense and auto industries depend heavily on Canadian nickel, lithium, and cobalt, materials essential for electric vehicle batteries and advanced manufacturing. Nickel from Sudbury feeds directly into U.S. defense contracts. Even the Pentagon acknowledges Canada's importance in supply security as Washington tries to reduce dependence on China. Third, the consumer market. Canada buys roughly 2 million vehicles each year. More than 23% of all U.S.-built vehicles are sold to Canadian consumers. Japan buys only about 1%. Canada isn't just a supplier. It's one of America's biggest customers. This interdependence forms the backbone of Canada's argument. Trump tariffs don't make America stronger. They make it more fragile. By the end of that week, what began as an American declaration of dominance turned into a political reckoning. Federal ministers and provincial premiers started coordinating more tightly. Doug Ford and Mark Carney, often at odds domestically, suddenly found common cause. Both talked about defending Canadian industries through strategic retaliation if needed. For Trump, the optics got complicated. His administration projects strength through confrontation, but the economic numbers tell a different story. U.S. manufacturing output slowed through the summer. The Federal Reserve reported a 1.8% drop in factory production between June and September 2025. the steepest decline since early 2023. Trump tariffs meant to protect U.S. industry are feeding inflation and cutting profits. Meanwhile, Canada's response shifted from reactive to strategic. Instead of retaliating wildly, Ottawa started working sector by sector, protecting steel and aluminum through provincial cooperation, securing energy exports with new long-term buyers in Europe, keeping critical mineral strategies aligned with allies like Japan and South Korea. And then came the infrastructure play that changes everything. Prime Minister Mark Carney placed the Port of Montreal expansion among 5 national projects chosen for fast-track approval. This isn't just about handling more cargo. It's about securing independence in logistics when Trump tariffs make cross-border reliance dangerous. Once complete, the port expansion will add capacity for more than 1 million containers per year. The federal government estimates 1,200 construction jobs and 140 million Canadian dollars in annual economic value once operational. Completion is targeted for 2030. Here's why this matters. For years, central Canada's trade flowed through American ports like New York and New Jersey before reaching global markets. That dependency gave the United States leverage. With the new Montreal terminal, Canadian exporters can ship directly to Europe and Atlantic markets without rerouting through U.S. infrastructure. Trump tariffs were supposed to weaken Canada. Instead, they're fueling determination to stand on firmer ground. But the energy play is even bigger. The Wind West offshore wind project in Nova Scotia was placed on Canada's list of projects of national interest. The first phase alone is planned at 5,000 megawatts, generating about 24 terawatt-hours of electricity each year. The full offshore potential reaches 40 to 60 gigawatts. Nova Scotia only consumes 2 to 3 gigawatts. That surplus becomes leverage. The United States is a net importer of electricity. ISO New England data shows the region depends on imports from Quebec and New Brunswick. Coal units are being retired. Gas remains volatile. Demand for low-carbon supply is rising. Dominion energy projects that regional electricity demand could double within 15 years, driven by artificial intelligence and data centers. Canadian electricity isn't optional. It's the stabilizer that keeps American grids reliable. Here's the irony. President Donald Trump imposed global tariffs between 10 and 50%. He threatened 100% tariffs on semiconductors. Canada faced high duties on steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber. Yet the same United States pressuring Canada on trade is short of power. Washington cannot easily replace the energy lifeline flowing across the border. Trump tariffs were designed to restore American control, but they're tightening a cost spiral and making North American production less competitive globally. Every tariff that lands on Canada lands back on Detroit twice as hard. Canada's measured patience, seen by some as weakness, now looks like resilience. Power in trade isn't about who shouts louder, it's about who can afford to stay calm when the other side starts breaking its own rules. When those turbines rise off Nova Scotia's coast, and when that Montreal terminal opens in 2030, they won't just represent infrastructure, they'll represent a strategic shift. The map of North American trade will look different, with Canada more confident as a direct gateway to the world. Trump tariffs caused pain in the short term, but they pushed Canada to build independence that could outlast any administration in Washington. The balance of power shifted. The bombshell meant to shake Canada exposed America's own vulnerabilities. When a superpower tries to dominate its neighbor, it risks unraveling the shared system that made both prosperous. What do you think? Can Trump tariffs actually backfire and strengthen Canada's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments.